April 1951. Desilu Productions, General Service Studios, Hollywood. The dressing room was smaller than people imagine, 12 by 14 feet. One mirror framed in bulbs that buzzed faintly when the building's air conditioning kicked on. A low, industrial hum that made the silence feel heavier than it was. The walls were that particular shade of beige that wasn't chosen so much as left over, the kind of color that didn't photograph and didn't matter. Lucille sat in front of that mirror at 6:47 a.m., 23 minutes before the table read for the pilot episode of I Love Lucy. Her hands were still. That was the thing those of us who worked the early calls noticed first. Not her face, not her posture, but the absolute motionlessness of her hands. Most actresses arrived fussing. Compact, lipstick, powder, hair, compact again. A nervous loop of small corrections. Lucy's hands rested palms down on the vanity top. The surface was cool for mica, slightly gritty with face powder that hadn't been wiped away from the night before. She could feel every grain of it under her fingertips, a texture that somehow made the stillness more deliberate. She was 40 years old. The studio lights hadn't been turned on yet in stage 2, but she could hear the stagehands setting up. The hollow knock of flats being positioned, the metallic scrape of a C-stand dragged across concrete, the distant snap of a lighting gel being clipped into place. Somewhere a man laughed, then stopped mid-breath, as though he'd remembered he was too early for joy. On the vanity in front of her, one tube of Max Factor lipstick, red, 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 the label worn down to a shadow. One compact with a cracked mirror she refused to replace. One call sheet, corners already softening from being handled. One script with her name printed at the top in clean black type. Lucy Ricardo, not Lucille Ball. Lucy Ricardo. The coffee in the paper cup beside her elbow had gone cold an hour ago. A faint ring of beige forming where the liquid met air. She hadn't touched it since 5:30. It smelled burnt and slightly sweet, the way all studio coffee smelled, percolated too long in aluminum urns that were never cleaned properly, cut with canned milk that left a metallic aftertaste. Outside the dressing room, the corridor was still dim. The janitor, a man named Frank, who'd been at general service since 1938, had just finished mopping, and the hallway smelled like ammonia and lemon wax, sharp enough to sting if you breathed in too fast. His cart squeaked as he rolled it toward the exit. One wheel slightly off axis, and the sound faded slowly, swallowed by the long throat of the building. Lucille lifted her hand slowly. She reached for the lipstick, unscrewed the base with 2 rotations, and brought the color to her mouth without looking at the mirror. Her lips parted. The wax was cool and stiff, not yet softened by the heat of her skin. She dragged it across her bottom lip in one smooth pull, then pressed her lips together once, not to blend, but to feel the weight of it. The scent was faint, rose oil and lanolin, with that waxy undertone that all stage makeup carried, a smell that clung to costumes and couch cushions and the inside of a woman's purse. She still hadn't looked at the mirror. Someone knocked. 2 knuckles, light and quick. 15 minutes, Miss Ball. It was Maury, the assistant director. He always knocked like that, apologetic, as though he were interrupting something sacred. He probably was. Thank you, Maury. Her voice came out smooth, practiced. The kind of voice that had said thank you to directors and producers and men who controlled her next paycheck for 20 years. She waited until his footsteps faded. Soft-soled shoes on linoleum, moving toward stage 2, where the rest of the cast would already be gathering around a long folding table covered in scripts and styrofoam cups. Then she looked at the mirror. The woman looking back had good bones, everyone said so. Sharp cheekbones that photographed well. A jawline that healed under studio lights, eyes that could go wide or narrow, depending on what the scene required. But the woman in the mirror was also a contract player who'd spent 2 decades being replaced. You're too tall, Lucy. You're too old now, Lucy. You're funny, Lucy. But funny doesn't sell pictures. They'd said it kindly. They'd said it in studio offices with leather chairs and glass ashtrays. They'd said it while smiling, while signing her checks, while shaking Desi's hand and asking him if he'd consider doing a TV project without her. She could still hear the particular tone of the executive's voice 3 months ago. We love Desi, but Does it have to be Lucy? The compact sat in front of her, cracked mirror catching the light in fractured pieces. She picked it up, felt its weight. It had been her mother's once, a gift from a traveling salesman in Jamestown, New York, back when Dee Ball still believed nice things happened to women who waited patiently. The hinge was loose now. The powder inside had been replaced a dozen times, but the case itself, silver-plated brass, worn soft at the edges, had survived. Lucille opened it. The crack in the mirror split her face in two. On one side, the mouth that could sell soap and cigarettes. On the other, the eyes that had watched 20 years of almost. She snapped it shut. The sound was small and final, like a door locking from the inside. Outside, the studio lot was waking. The smell of diesel from the trucks pulling in. The distant clang of the commissary kitchen prepping breakfast. The dry, dusty warmth of California morning air filtering through the stage door that someone had propped open with a sandbag. Lucille stood. Her skirt, a navy A-line she'd pressed herself the night before, whispered as she smoothed it once, twice, 3 times. The fabric was still cool from hanging in the closet. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory, from years of costume fittings, wardrobe approval, standing still while someone pinned a hem. She picked up the script. The edges were soft now, slightly damp from where her palms had held it. She walked to the door, her heels clicking once, twice on the linoleum. Then she stopped, her hand on the doorknob, cold brass, worn smooth. From the other side of the door, she could hear voices now. Mark and Jess already at the table. Vivian's laugh echoing off the high ceiling. Desi's voice cutting through with that accent the network had asked him to soften, and he'd refused. The door was 6 panels of hollow wood, painted industrial gray. She turned the knob and stepped through into a room full of people who had no idea whether this would work. Stage 2, 7:10 a.m. The table was longer than it needed to be. Folding legs, metal braces, topped with a sheet of plywood covered in black fabric that someone, probably Maury, had stapled down over the weekend. It stretched nearly 20 feet, positioned dead center under a grid of overhead lights that hadn't been turned on yet. The only illumination came from work lights clamped to C-stands at either end, throwing long shadows across the stage floor. The room smelled like sawdust and spirit gum. Underneath that, cigarette smoke from the night crew, fresh paint from a set piece being touched up in the corner, and the faint sweetness of hairspray. Someone had already been to hair and makeup. Vivian Vance sat 3 chairs down, flipping through her script with the kind of focus that looked casual but wasn't. She was new to Los Angeles, still had that Broadway sharpness in her posture, the way she held a pencil poised over the page as though the words might change if she looked away. Her perfume was light, something floral and powdery, drugstore elegant. Evening in Paris, maybe. The kind of scent a woman wore when she wasn't trying to announce herself. Mark and Jess sat across from each other, murmuring notes. Mark had circled something on page 4. Jess was nodding, but his eyes kept flicking toward the door. Desi stood at the head of the table. He wasn't sitting. He never sat at table reads. He paced, or he leaned, or he stood with his hands on the back of a chair, but he never sat. It was a bandleader's habit, the need to see the whole room, to feel the tempo before the downbeat. He was wearing a guayabera, pale gray, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His watch caught the light when he gestured, a thin gold band he'd bought himself the year Too Many Girls opened on Broadway. He smelled like bay rum and the faint residue of cigar smoke that lived in the fabric of everything he owned. When Lucille walked in, he looked up, not at her face, at her hands. She was holding the script against her chest, both arms wrapped around it like a schoolgirl carrying books. He knew that grip. She only held things that tightly when she wasn't sure she'd get to keep them. "Morning, honey," he said. His voice was easy, warm, the kind of tone that made people relax without realizing why. "Morning." She crossed to her chair, the second from the left facing the stage, and set the script down carefully, as though it might spill. Vivian glanced up, smiled. "You look great." Lucille returned the smile. It was perfect, practiced. The smile of a woman who'd been told she looked great in every waiting room, powder room, and studio lobby from Culver City to Burbank. "Thanks, Viv." She sat, the chair creaked once under her weight. Faint metallic groan from the folding hinge. She adjusted her skirt, smoothed it across her knees, then rested her hands palms down on the table. Still. Maury appeared from the wings, clipboard in hand. Okay, folks, let's get started. The overhead lights buzzed to life. Everyone blinked. The room transformed, and shadows vanished, every surface suddenly flat and bright. The black fabric on the table looked cheaper in full light. The walls looked farther away. Vivian's face, which had seemed soft in the work lights, now showed the faint line of powder along her jaw, where makeup ended and neck began. Lucille felt the heat from the lights on the crown of her head. Jess Oppenheimer cleared his throat. All right, he said, flipping open his script. Episode 1. The audition. Lucy wants to be in Ricky's show. Ricky doesn't think she's talented enough. A beat? Someone, Mark maybe, laughed under his breath. Jess continued. She sneaks into the club, disguises herself. Hilarity, as they say, ensues. Lucille stared at the first page. Lucy Ricardo was printed at the top in bold type. Below that, the first line of dialogue. But Ricky, I can be in the show. She'd read it 100 times in the past 2 weeks. She'd read it out loud in her living room. She'd read it in the car on the way to the studio. She'd read it at 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep. Desi snoring softly beside her, the script open on her lap under a single reading lamp. But now, sitting at this table under these lights with these people who were paid to make this work or walk away, the words looked different. They looked like a test she hadn't studied for. Lucy, Jess prompted, whenever you're ready. She inhaled. The air tasted like dust and leftover coffee, and the faint chemical tang of the spirits they used to clean costumes. She opened her mouth. But Ricky, I can be in the show. Her voice came out bright. Too bright. She felt it immediately. The extra push, the slight lift at the end, the eagerness that wasn't quite Lucy Ricardo yet, still a little too much Lucille Ball, trying to prove she could do this. Desi didn't blink. No, Lucy, you cannot be in the show. His accent was thick, deliberate. He leaned into every consonant, let the rhythm bounce. It sounded ridiculous. It sounded perfect. Vivian jumped in, reading Ethel's line with a deadpan precision that made Jess grin. Mark followed. The table read move forward, but Lucille felt herself lagging half a beat behind, her lines landing just a fraction too late, her laugh coming a second after everyone else's. She was good. She knew she was good, but good wasn't the same as right. 10:30 a.m., first break. The stagehands had set up a craft services table near the back wall. Coffee in that same dented aluminum urn, a tray of donuts from the bakery on Melrose, paper napkins in a stack that kept trying to blow away every time someone opened the stage door. Lucille stood by the table, holding a donut she hadn't bitten into. It was glazed, slightly stale, the sugar coating gone matte instead of shiny. She turned it slowly in her hand, feeling the weight of it, the way the dough compressed slightly under her thumb. Vivian appeared beside her, pouring coffee into a styrofoam cup. You doing okay? Lucille looked at her. Vivian's eyes were kind, not pitying, just present. Yeah, Lucille said. Just finding it. Vivian nodded, took a sip, winced. God, this coffee. I know. They stood there for a moment, not talking, just existing in the small pocket of quiet while the men discussed blocking, and Maury made notes, and somewhere a hammer hit wood 3 times in quick succession. Vivian lowered her voice. For what it's worth, she said, I think you're doing great. Lucille smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Thanks, Viv. Vivian walked away. Lucille looked down at the donut in her hand. She set it on a napkin, untouched. 11:45 p.m. That same night, Lucille's dressing room. She sat in the dark. The overhead bulbs were off. The mirror lights were off. The only illumination came from the hallway, a thin bar of yellow slipping under the door, just enough to see shapes but not details. She'd taken off her shoes. They sat beside the vanity, toes pointed toward the wall, heels resting on their sides. The left one had a scuff on the back she hadn't noticed before. Her stockings were still on, the seams perfectly straight. She'd checked twice in the bathroom mirror after the table read wrapped. Her skirt was wrinkled now from sitting, bunched slightly at her hips. She hadn't bothered to smooth it. The dressing room smelled like cold cream and the faint linger of that morning's coffee, which had finally been thrown away around noon, leaving a brown ring on the vanity top that someone would have to scrub tomorrow. Lucille stared at the wall. There was a water stain near the ceiling, shaped like the profile of a dog, or maybe a horse. She'd never been able to decide. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers loosely interlaced. Not still anymore, shaking just slightly. A tremor she could feel but not see. The table read had gone fine. That was the word Jess had used, fine. Good energy, Desi had said, clapping Mark on the shoulder. We'll tighten it up, Maury had added, flipping through his notes. Fine. Good energy. Tighten it up. The language of people who were being professionally optimistic. Lucille had smiled. She'd nodded. She'd said, "See you Monday," and walked off the stage with her script tucked under her arm and her heels clicking with the exact rhythm of confidence. And then she'd come here, to the dark she could leave. The thought arrived quietly, without drama, like someone setting down a glass on a table. She could walk away from this, go back to the ranch in Chatsworth. Desi could do the show without her. They'd find another actress, someone younger, someone the network wouldn't have to fight for. She could plant roses, learn to cook something other than scrambled eggs. Maybe take up painting or bridge or any of the thousand things women did when they stopped trying to be seen. It wouldn't be shameful. It would be reasonable. She was 40 years old. She'd worked for 20 years. She'd done her time in B pictures and studio contracts and waiting rooms where younger girls got called in first. She'd tried. God knows she'd tried. Maybe trying was enough. A sound, faint from the hallway, footsteps. Not Maury's soft-souled shuffle, not Desi's confident stride. These were slower, heavier. The walk of someone who'd been standing all day. The footsteps stopped outside her door. A pause, then a voice, low and a little rough. "Miss Ball? You still in there?" Frank, the janitor. Lucille didn't answer. Another pause. "I'm gonna mop this hallway in about 10 minutes," Frank said. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Just wanted you to know." His cart squeaked as he moved on. That off-axis wheel, dragging slightly to the left. Lucille closed her eyes. The smell of lemon wax drifted under the door, sharp and clean, with that faint chemical burn that lingered in the back of the throat if you breathed it in too long. It smelled like the Jamestown Public Library. She was 7 years old. Her mother had taken her there on a Saturday, not because Dee Ball loved books, but because the library was warm and free and you could sit for hours without anyone asking you to leave. Lucille had wandered into the adult section, where the shelves were taller and the books had no pictures, and she'd found one with a red cover that said the theater in gold letters. She'd pulled it down. It was heavy. The pages smelled like dust and ink and something faintly sweet. Maybe someone had eaten an apple while reading, left a sticky thumbprint on the page 43. She'd opened it to a photograph, a woman on a stage, not a movie star, a stage actress. Standing in a pool of light, one arm extended, her face turned toward an unseen audience, with an expression Lucille didn't have words for yet. Not happiness, not sadness, something bigger, something that looked like permission. Lucille had stood there in the library, holding that book, breathing in the smell of floor wax and old paper, and she'd thought, "I want to do that, not be that, do that, make people feel something by standing in the light and meaning it." She opened her eyes. The dressing room was still dark. Her hands had, though, stopped shaking. She stood. Slowly, carefully, as though testing whether her legs would hold her. They did. She crossed to the vanity, felt for the edge of it in the dark, and flipped the switch for the mirror lights. The bulbs buzzed to life. She blinked against the brightness. Her face stared back, makeup gone, lipstick faded to a pale stain, hair slightly flat from where she'd rested her head against the wall. She looked tired. She looked 40. She looked real. She reached for the lipstick. Red, red, red. Twisted the base. The wax had softened now, warmed by the hours it had spent sitting on the vanity. It dragged smoothly across her bottom lip, then her top, the color bright and unapologetic. She pressed her lips together, not to blend, to commit. She picked up the script, opened it to page 1, read the first line again. "But Ricky, I can be in the show," she said it out loud. Softer this time, less bright, more real. The desperation of a woman who knows she's funny but hasn't been allowed to prove it. The hope of someone who's been told no 1,000 times and is asking one more time anyway. Lucy Ricardo, not Lucille Ball trying to play her, just her. Lucille set the script down. She smoothed her skirt, picked up her shoes, and walked out into the hallway, where Frank was pushing his mop in slow, careful strokes, the smell of lemon wax trailing behind him like a memory. Monday, April 16th, 1951. Stage 2, 9:00 a.m. The call time was earlier than the table read. Hair and makeup at 7:30, wardrobe at 8:15. First blocking rehearsal at 9 sharp. Lucille arrived at 7:00. The lot was still quiet, just the distant hum of the commissary kitchen, the dry rustle of palm fronds in the breeze, the faint smell of diesel from a truck idling near the loading dock. She walked across the pavement in heels that clicked with the same rhythm as before, but somehow the sound felt different. Lighter, more deliberate. When she pushed open the door to stage 2, the lights were already on. Desi was standing at the edge of the set, the living room of the Ricardo apartment, half finished, the walls still raw plywood waiting for paint. He was talking to the set designer, gesturing at the couch, the coffee table, the placement of the kitchen door. He looked up when she walked in. She was wearing the same navy skirt, the same lipstick, but her hair was different and softer, curled in a way that looked less styled and more lived in. Desi smiled. "Morning, honey." "Morning." She crossed to him, set her purse on the prop table, and looked at the set. "It's smaller than I thought," she said. "Good," Desi replied. "Means the cameras can stay close." She nodded. Picked up a prop glass from the coffee table. Empty, slightly dusty. She turned it in her hand, felt the weight of it. Cheap glass. The kind that would survive being dropped. She set it down with new care, adjusting the angle slightly so it caught the light. "You ready?" Desi asked. Lucille looked at him. "Yeah," she said, and meant it. 6 months later. October 15th, 1951. I Love Lucy premiered on CBS at 9:00 p.m. Eastern. 40 million people watched. In living rooms across America, women sat beside their husbands, their children, their mothers, and laughed at a woman who wanted to be in the show even though everyone told her she couldn't. They laughed because she was funny, but they kept watching because she was real. In Jamestown, New York, Didi Ball sat in front of her television with a handkerchief in her lap and didn't cry when her daughter appeared on screen. She smiled. Lucille's dressing room. November 1951. The name on the door had been repainted, not Lucille Ball. Lucy Ricardo. Inside, the room smelled like cold cream and hairspray and coffee that was only an hour old. On the vanity, one tube of lipstick, red, red, red. The label still worn. One compact with a cracked mirror she still refused to replace. One script for episode 12, corners already soft from being held. Lucille sat in front of the mirror, her face lit by bulbs that no longer buzzed. She picked up the compact, opened it. The crack was still there, splitting her reflection in two. But now, when she looked, she saw the same woman on both sides. She snapped it shut and smiled, not for the camera, for herself. Those of us who were there, we remember the sound of her heels on linoleum, the smell of lemon wax in the hallways, the way she held that lipstick like a promise she was finally ready to keep. And years later, when people asked her how she did it, how she became Lucy, she would smile and say something funny and never quite tell the truth. Because the truth was this: she didn't become someone else. She just stopped pretending to be anyone but herself. And that was the hardest thing she ever did.